Welcome to the Rebuild Procurement podcast, the number one podcast in procurement in the world, where we dive deep into topics to keep procurement people up to date and ahead of their peers. Subscribe on YouTube, keep going, and tell your friends, tell your family. On today's episode, we're doing another how it's sourced. Today, we're going to dive into specifically the tennis racket, right? There's some news coming up. We have a reason for going in this one, right, Alan?
Yeah, that's right. We, for those of you tennis fans at home that might follow professional tennis, the Grand Slam, we're in part 2 of the Grand Slam. We started in January with the Australian Open. We are now right smack dab, late May and early June, in the middle of French Open, Roland Garros, soon to be followed by Wimbledon over in London, and then back to the U.S. We've got the U.S. Open in August.
Yeah, so this one was a little more difficult for me than Alan, but let's get into it. I'm Tom Finn, bringing 15 years on the client side procurement, finance, and category management experience in large and small cap orgs.
And I'm Alan Veek, a procurement geek on the sell side of our street. I've assembled a team of superhuman procurement professionals who are doing managed services at a company that we call Summit.
Let's get into it.
All right. So Tommy, you're a kind of a next door tennis fan. You're not like an in the room.
Yeah, who's
tennis
playing?
fan.
Is it Andre Agassi? Alan, is that who's up?
Interesting. That's the only time you're going to hear that name, because Andre Agassi was not a clay guy.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Things
Yes.
I really don't know. I know I've played for fun with friends and enjoyed it.
That's right.
I have some neighbors that play, so it is an enjoyment like that I've had, but I've never gotten into it. I did have like a friend he was like a pro that was like a coach, and he was the guy I sat down and like watched it with a few times, but never got so much into it.
Yeah, no, this is a fun time of year. I've got my whole family plays racket sports, especially tennis. All my kids play tennis, and my 2 youngest boys did it pretty competitively, and they are completely into it. So I usually they keep me up to speed on what's happening with regards to tennis. So we are at the quarterfinals over in Paris, France. The annual Roland Garros French Open, played on the iconic red clay. This Saturday, we will see women's singles championship being played out. But currently in the quarterfinals, we've got probably the odds-on favorite, Sabalenka, who is a pretty strong phenom. She's ranked number 1 in the world. She's playing her quarterfinals. She already played her quarterfinals yesterday, and she won. So she's headed to the semis. And then we've got Iga Świątek, the Polish woman.
I feel like that was great pronunciation, by the way.
Thank you.
Sounded good.
It doesn't. Her name looks nothing like that, so you got to learn how to pronounce it and then read it separately. But Iga Świątek, she's won it. She won it last year, and she's won it every year for the last 4 years, except for one of those years. So Iga is the odds-on favorite. You tend to find that people who are really good at clay dominate on clay. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't Sabalenka v Świątek, which is a grudge match. They didn't play last year, but they played many years in the past, faced each other at other championships. But Iga is the odds-on favorite to take it, even though she's ranked 5th in the world to Sabalenka's number 1. You know, women's tennis is considered to be a little bit more dynamic, meaning anyone at any point in time, any given Sunday, as they say, any given Saturday could win. So it could be an upset, could be Świątek ruling the world again, but it's kind of fun to watch. Then when we pop over to the men's singles, again, same sort of story, pretty standard set of people who are at the top of it. Number 1, 2, and 3, Jannik Sinner. He's got a quarterfinal to play tomorrow. Today, a little bit later on today, we're going to watch Carlos Alcaraz, who's number 2 in the world, but he's kind of the dominant guy. He won it last year. Sinner won it last year, I believe. Alcaraz will be playing this afternoon. And then we've got a couple Americans in there still. Tommy Paul is probably gonna lose to Alcaraz. That's just such a buzzsaw. Tommy Paul, though, he and Francis Tiafoe, ranked number 12th and 15th respectively, are punching above their weight. Made it all the way to the quarterfinals. Proud of those boys. So a lot of fun tennis to watch. But certainly as we get to Sunday for the men's finals, I encourage everyone to watch it. Should be a good match. Wouldn't be too surprised to see another rematch of the Italian Sinner versus the Spaniard Alcaraz. Should be fun.
Yeah, sounds. I guess by the time people listen, some of those have already taken place. You've laid out predictions, Alan.
Yeah, I've given some people given folks some people to watch and laid out some predictions. Yeah. So last year the winners were the Spaniard Alcaraz and the Pole Swiatek. So wouldn't be too surprised to see that same order repeated again this year. So yeah, this is the 129th playing of the French Open. It started way back in 1891. There were a few years when they didn't play during World War I, and World War II. And as I mentioned already, this is the second in the Grand Slam lineup after the Australian Open, but before Wimbledon and the US Open coming later on this summer. The iconic red clay courts. I've got my first little visual graphic I can share here that I think is fun to share. Let me see if I can pull this bad boy up. The making of the gravel of the surface rather is quite impressive. Check this out. Okay, the clay. Here's what goes into the clay. We've got red brick dust that sits on the top. It's a very precise rolled layer that sits on top of some white limestone. I believe that's about a 3-inch layer of crushed white limestone that sits on top of a few inches of clinker. Just love to say that word, clinker, which is a coal residue. Think of it just kind of like dirt, stuff, filler. And then that sits on
it's
about
not as sophisticated if you don't say clinker, though. If you say dirt, it doesn't sound as sophisticated.
I've been here in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's coal country, so we know a little bit about clinker. I think they call it around here clinker ash.
Interesting.
They use it actually in my township. They use it in my township instead of salt. Salt for the snowy and icy roads. They don't put salt down because they think it's an environmental hazard and bad for fill in the blank, bad for the watershed.
So just throw coal on the ground instead.
Just throw this stuff that
worried
came
about
out of
salt
the fiery
runoff.
furnace.
Just make a coal runoff.
Yeah. So that's my township, but that sits then on top of about a foot of gravel that helps to maintain some of the drainage. The clay is famously difficult for drainage, but this is kind of how they manage to get the drainage up a bit, is by putting it on top of gravel. So that's what the clay looks like. Let's talk about some of the history of the tournament itself as well. The people who are good at playing on clay, it's a very different surface. You think about the other surfaces that you might play tennis on. You play on grass at Wimbledon and at other venues. On the US Open and Australian Open, they play on hard true, or basically some sort of a synthetic surface, a cement surface in essence. Well, clay is one of the softest surfaces, and to be able to play well on clay, you got to be a specialist. You have to be really good at speed and control. It's considered to be kind of like the thinking tennis player's game because it involves a lot of strategy. It's very hard to hit winners. And those who are top spin specialists don't tend to play as well on clay because it's a slower surface. It's going to bounce higher, so your top spin doesn't have as much effect. But we've got considered to be the king of clay. Look at this, 14 titles for Rafael Nadal.
So are these Grand Slams, Alan? This is my noviceness.
So French Open is one of the 4 Grand Slam titles. You win the Grand Slam if you win all 4 in the same year.
Because I was looking at
this is one of the Grand Slams.
The top men's Grand Slam singles all time. Because there's Federer, Nadal. Is it Djokovic? Djokovic. They all have 20. And it's interesting to see that a lot of you always think Federer and Nadal head to head, and Nadal had 14 on the clay.
On the clay, he's considered to be a clay specialist.
Yeah, no
He
idea.
had a hard time. Yeah, he had a hard time, obviously, in the other Grand Slams. But boy, he owned everyone. He cleaned their clock on the clay. As a matter of fact, they have 4 or 5 big statues around the Roland Garros Stadium
Of just Nadal.
where this is played. And well, one of them is Nadal. The other,
Okay.
so a Spaniard. They put a Spaniard up. The rest are all French, of course. They've got the big statue of Roland Garros. Now, where does this name come from? Roland Garros is the name of the stadium. The person who gave the money to the building of the stadium mandated that they name it after Roland Garros, who was he's not a tennis player, he's a famous World War I flying ace. He died before he was 30 years old, but he's considered to be kind of like the father of aviation in the French Air Force. So that's where this tournament gets its name. Interesting that it's not named for a tennis player. But back to Rafael Nadal. He when he made his tennis debut in 2005, he faced off against Roger Federer in the finals at the Roland Garros, and he was a 19-year-old teenager, kind of shows up on the scene, cleans Federer's clock, and then proceeds to clean everyone's clock for basically the next 20, 25 years on clay. So he is kind of the established ace on the clay. We got this very early French player before the French Open was open, when it was just a French national title. I won't try to pronounce his name. We'll call him Max. But then interestingly, some names that people know. Bjorn Borg won 6 titles. Another Frenchman in the early days won a few titles. And then big names on the female side. Steffi Graf is in there. Chrissy Evert is in there. I believe that certainly the Serena Williams, she won her fair number, maybe 3 titles, 4 titles. So it's a pretty impressive group of names that tend to be good on clay. The arena itself, named Stade Roland Garros, the Stadium of Roland Garros, it's been around since 1927. So you'll be watching from this tennis complex that's grown over the course of the last almost 100 years. They're going to be celebrating their 100th year anniversary, and we talked about where the name itself comes from. Quite an iconic tournament, quite a cultural phenomenon in France, and I encourage everybody to have a fun time Saturday, Sunday. If you don't get a chance to watch it, maybe VCR it, DVD it. What do we call it nowadays, Tom? What do? You record it. Yes, thank you. You just record it, or at least watch the highlights. There'll be some highlights posted on YouTube. So that's the history of this actual tournament itself. Maybe give me 2 minutes to riff on the history of tennis, which I think is a lot of fun as well. So you're going to talk a little bit about this. Riff away. I think tennis has got to be one of the oldest games around. It started out as kind of a French handball game before rackets were even around in the 12th and 13th century. Then finally, the game started to emerge and look like it does today in the 1870s in England. And I thought it was quite interesting. A lot of the reading and research that I did on this said the game as we know it today first evolved through rules. So they had to establish rules. So picture this, in the earliest days, yes, rectangular courts were the first courts that were built, but then people came up with hourglass-shaped courts and circular courts and all kinds of other weird shapes. So first of all, we had to kind of establish some international rules. Once the rules were established, then ball manufacturers started to make very predictable, repeatable balls so that bounce would be the same, size would be the same, reaction off the racket would be the same. And it was only then, when the rules and the balls were established, that the rackets finally started to be standardized. The name racket itself comes from a 14th century French word that means palm of the hand. And here's a fun one, Tom. Any idea where the name tennis comes from?
I do not know.
Yeah. So I thought this one was a lot of fun. It's another 14th century French word, tenez, T-N-E-Z, tenez, which means hold or receive or take.
To take.
Like to hold, like, this notion of holding a ball. That's a kind of a Latin derivative term, tenez. So I had never known that. I had never figured that out. That's where tennis comes from, is this term meaning to hold. The first international tournament was the Davis Cup, founded in 1880. It's named after Dwight Davis, who donated the cup itself. So this is he was an American
Ah,
tennis player. Yeah, and the first rackets, of course, were wooden. And before I steal your thunder, maybe I'll pass it over to you. Do you want to talk a little bit about the evolution of the racket?
yeah. I mean, so I actually have a little diagram here because the original ones, they were a lot of like made out of one kind of piece of wood. So you think of like the head of a racket, that top piece with the interwovenness. It was lopsided, which I had no idea. Just like a lot of a lot of this research going in for me, right, Alan? So
Yep.
I thought this is a pretty cool little diagram here. So
Ah.
it actually, you think this piece here, this top piece, so call it the round for those that are listening, that round piece that you hit the ball off of, it was actually like, distorted in a way. And that whole top part that was connected all the way down to the grips where you hold, essentially that was one piece of wood that they would soften it, and they would kind of just like mold it as it, it had water in it,
Yep.
and then they would dry it out,
Bend it.
and then from there be able to bend it exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that wood was the main, beginningness after the anatomy of a hand to play tennis. So that started all the way back in the 1870s is when they started using that wood racket. And the real, call it like innovations that happen, was the lamination of that wood. You don't think about it, right? But if you're just having like a piece of wood and you're outside playing, it's going to rot. It's going to, lose the tension, which then helps hit the ball. And the lamination of wood, which was used for a long time, just that it was used through the 60s, this like wooden era. Um, that's essentially what the racket was. It was a wooden racket.
Yeah, I think about the when you go to the hardware store. I remember going with my dad as a kid and seeing all the different types of wood that were for sale in the hardware store. You had the solid wood, and my dad always told me, you see that plywood over there that's so much cheaper, that's much stronger than the solid wood, and that always kind of surprised me and shocked me. It's this notion of laminating layers with adhesive between them produces great strength. That's the same thing that they did with that tennis racket. Also made it more malleable, bendable, foldable, shapeable. I read in one of the articles I read, it said when they moved to laminated wood from solid wood, they were able to bend laminated wood by as much as 90 degrees. So you get these incredible shapes.
Oh, no
you can
way. So it's
start
actually able to
build.
hold form without cracking too.
That's right. Yep.
Oh, no way. That's pretty cool,
Yep.
right? One piece of wood.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of a lot of times think, oh, stuff will be glued, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're going to try and have tension over time, if you have this like broken part, just even in metal, if you're going to weld it, that's a point of which is much more likely to fail than the rest of the continuity of the wood or the metal.
Cool.
So, yeah. Do you have more you want to touch on there, Alan, or you want to go through these the different stages of the sourcing aspect of this?
Let's hit the sourcing. I love the sourcing. That's what we're here for, right? We're procurement guys.
For it. Yeah. So the other big piece, you figure there's kind of like three main parts. I mean, there's a little bit more, I guess, nuance, but the three main parts of a racket, you figure that top head piece. Then you would have what you're holding, right? The grips. So that start off as like a leather type of grip. And then the strings that go in, is it strings, twine? What's
strings?
Strings. Yeah. They're predominantly natural gut. So from animals. So I was watching a YouTube video. You don't appreciate YouTube a lot of times until you like need it. Kind of go down the rabbit hole of whatever pops up for you of interest. But they had this manufacturing of like how today, like it's separated by hand to use for tennis rackets. Like you can still buy them on Amazon. This natural gut strings used in violins and instruments as well, like to this day, as opposed to synthetic, which
and in hot dogs. Don't forget. Used in hot dogs as well.
Oh yeah, is that the outer? Is that the casing?
I think natural casing is it might even be like.
Wouldn't be surprised if most of it's synthetic now, but you definitely want the ones like the linked sausages, those ones, right? That's the kind of where they like twirl it a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Think of a tennis racket the next time you're eating a hot dog or a piece of sausage.
Yeah, just think of the animal that helps support you, as many do. So then in the 50s to the 80s, that's when metal became more abundant within tennis. So you just think about the susceptibility of warping, even if it's laminated, lamination wears off over time. So then what's another type of commodity or substance you could use? And steel and aluminum they were ones that came in. So at first, they wouldn't, as happens with all innovations or most innovations, it didn't work out perfectly at first, but it was the route they went. So 2 names, one I didn't realize was associated with tennis. The first was through Rene Lacoste, which I'm also pronouncing the name wrong, I'm sure.
That's the French Open right there, baby.
Okay. Yeah, is that also like the shirts, right?
It is.
The alligator?
Yeah.
Had no
all of us
idea
used to wear in high school.
that was a tennis. That was but it makes sense, right? I've seen it in the in those opens and things. But they created a patent on a steel racket in 1957 that it was to be able to protect the strings better and from the sharp edges. And then Wilson, the Wilson T2000, took that one in and used that patent to create their Wilson tennis racket there. And then the secondary one, which it was Howard Head. I think Head now has the the gloves they sell at Costco too. That's where my family knows them well from, the Head winter gloves. But they came in with the aluminum in 1970s. So notably, the Prince Classic in 1976. So you just think, bikes, anything aluminum, is a lighter weight, right? Steel is that heavy, a little heavier than aluminum. So that was able to improve that performance. And just the additional thing that it added, Alan, was just, you think wood versus any metals, you're going to have an inherent stiffness, right? And if it's stiffer, then it's going to be able to hit it harder. And if it's also stiffer, you can have a bigger head, which leads to a bigger sweet spot to hit it harder.
Yeah, the sweet spot's what it's all about. Yeah. In the reading that I did, I was fascinated to find that in 1967, Billie Jean King, she won the U.S. Open in Queens using a steel racket. That was the first time a steel racket was involved in a Grand Slam championship. But then, because there's so much, it was lighter weight, like you said, bigger sweet spot, but I guess the vibration in this thing was just deadly. So she developed some elbow problems. So she switched back to wooden rackets for the next 10 years or 15
years. Oh, no way.
Yeah.
And you just think I have in my mind, just a picture of that, like the wooden racket, and how it was tinier, right? That head was smaller, it was kind of rounder looking versus the ones today has that giant head to it. So
and you mentioned, you brought the names that we all know and love regarding the manufacturers of tennis and racket equipment these days. You mentioned Head, you mentioned Dunlop, and Wilson. I also, one of the names that kind of wasn't around when I was a kid, but certainly has been around in the last 20, 25 years is Babolat. I don't know if you've seen Babolat. That's actually, he was, along with Lacoste, Babolat was one of the 4 French, they called them the 4 Musketeers. They won the Davis Cup early on. They were like French heroes. Babolat, a big manufacturer, Babolat made their name in the late 1800s as the quality manufacturer of that synthetic gut string. That's kind of where they made their name.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And a lot of it, there's eco-friendly ones that they go today, and over time they'll break down, things of that nature. You really probably could just use that natural gut instead, right? Go back to that. Right. So
nature's amazing.
Yeah. And it is interesting. I think a lot of the things something I've noticed, Alan, just over time, has been, and we'll continue here with just, it kind of segues into this, but a lot of things did go from being natural from nature in one way or another to how can we do that with oil, right? A lot of things just end up, we talked about gum, we talked about some other things, just even like you were saying, maybe it's not necessarily in hot dogs yet, right? And some of that edible things, but just if it was natural, and then it goes more towards just more chemistry, let's say, right? How can we do it through chemistry and a different makeup?
That's a good segue coming into the 1980s with the racket, right? Because that's all chemistry, better living through chemistry.
Yep. We have, so they moved more towards graphite, which is a carbon fiber, and some epoxy resins. So they would blend graphite with things like Kevlar. So it's all about how can someone either hit faster, hit better, more accuracy, right? Choose the technology for you. And they would also use fiberglass, titanium, boron for rigidity and high-end frames. Boron would go into it. Ceramics, which I find interesting. because ceramics can be quite hard, right? We think of them as
Yes.
like you bring it back to high school art, right? You're like, oh, ceramics. You're like, whatever. The arm fell off my whatever dinosaur, but really, ceramics they have a lot to them as well, right?
Yeah, there are certainly ceramics that are less brittle. I mean, there are thousands upon thousands of ceramics. They're basically a cocktail of different elements. That's what makes ceramics, and each one of them has you dial up or dial down certain properties. So yeah, you could certainly get the brittle dinosaur arm in your example, but you could also get
the poor T-Rex with one arm, right?
That's true. You could get the very strong tennis racket material.
Yeah, and it's lighter. I've used things that are better grade than that high school dinosaur. But then tungsten, which is like strategic weighting. So I guess you put it in certain spots. And then basalt fibers for vibration dampening was an additional one. But then there's just different ways they would go about it. I think they would try some different moldings and things of that nature. But a lot of this now is like these pre-preg sheets, which is like these resin impregnated fibers. And I think that they just essentially layer them on top of one another, call it like the layup. And then they make it harder via like heat and pressure. So heating them up and pressing them together, and then it cures and gets stronger. So they have those different materials like before, where it's just one wood piece, right? Back in the day, either one wood piece or one piece of just molded aluminum or steel. Now it's like a composition of materials that then leads to an outcome that they want via, call it the technology piece.
Yeah, it is amazing how many different ways you can combine materials to come up with what you're looking for. And that was one of the innovations that I read about, in addition to kind of this notion of smart rackets, where they're putting sensors inside the racket itself to be able to measure where you strike the ball, how you strike, how much topspin you put on it, what your swing speed is. In addition to that, some of the biggest innovation is actually, you think about sitting down with somebody like Rafael Nadal and saying, what are the specific things we're trying to accomplish with your swing? Now we're going to build a personalized, a bespoke racket just for you.
Bespoke.
That's going to be your racket built for your body and your game.
Yeah, just like those the suits, right? Like you might have to wait a little bit of time. It's going to take us 6 months or a year to get you the perfect racket, but it will be perfect.
It's going to fit you. Yeah, it's going to fit you. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then just the other sides, just the additional pieces. So like I'd said, the strings themselves, it was that gut, which you can still buy today. Interesting YouTube channels all over the place on that. But now a lot of it's more like resin and just certain different compositions to,
synthetics.
again, lead into whether it's weight or rigidity, or, if you're hitting for speed or kind of need a little softer for accuracy, those things. And then similarly, the grips, today they've evolved more towards the synthetic materials like polyurethane, EVA foam, and then that helps whether it's like the ability to hold it, like that tackiness, the cushioniness, like if folks are sweating, just they are working through chemistry to build in what the players need.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. I'm going to share this graphic because I think this graphic is just incredible. So this is basically when we went from wooden rackets to composite rackets. So call this 1870s up to like the 1980s, 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Look at all these differences that you get from the materials science. So mass went from 380 grams down to just under 300 grams. So you lost about 100 grams of weight. The head size itself,
which is essentially 25%. It's 25% less.
It's a huge number. You go from
so just to say it's
25%
less weight with basically 50% larger hitting area.
There it is, the head size. That's right. And then the stiffness, which of course allows you to drive the ball harder. You went up about 50%. And then the swing weight itself, which is kind of the weight, the acceleration weight, you drop that about 150 kilograms per square centimeter, which is, I guess that's another 25%. So pretty impressive. It's actually more like 35%. So pretty impressive improvement that comes from just, improving the raw materials that go into the rackets themselves.
Yeah, it is just the technology and just the way that things get progressed over time, right? Just to suit needs is pretty cool. And it really does. I mean, I think the tennis is probably a good example of just like a from to, right, what it was before, and then it's kind of essentially the same thing, right? You're kind of like swinging something to hit a ball and get it to the other side, and you just want it faster, you want it more accurate. But then there's all these little details too that you can play around via chemistry to make, like that sweat absorption within the grip, right? That's something you don't necessarily think of, but if you look at it, some might have like certain holes in it, things of that nature. It's it's just to suit people's needs over time and how you're able to use chemistry to get there.
Yeah, this is a little bit of an aside, but something that I like to think about. If you want to think about rackets sports philosophically, rackets as a broad category of sport is fascinating to me because they've basically taken, let's call it 4 main factors that you can vary, and they've built combination. They've combined these 4 different factors in different ways to make a ton of different sports. So today we're talking about tennis. So typically played on a hard surface that's about this big, with a net that's this high, with a ball that's this big, and a racket that looks like this. You vary any of those 4. So I like to think of what's the racket, what's the ball, what's the size of the court, and then is it contained or is it wide open? Now you can create all kinds of different racket sports, like pickleball, like padel, like platform tennis, which is hugely popular. Like ping pong, like all of
Squash,
these things.
Right? Squash is like its own.
Racquetball,
Just put a wall there.
Yeah, handball. I mean, so when you think about all the infinite number of racket sports that are out there, and there are tons, it's basically a permutation of these 4 main factors, and you got a whole different sport. It's a lot of fun to think about.
Yeah, its rules is like just the kindergartner rules, just kind of played out via adults, right? My son, I forget, he has this like one game they play. I'm sure folks would know it that have kids, but they essentially go into like this little court, and it's kind of a dodgeball, and they just have to hit it to try and get each other out. But it's like all the rage. They all have these little call it like mini courts in their playgrounds nowadays.
Yeah. So hopefully people think about these sourcing elements. They think about these game elements as they're watching this weekend. Again, Saturday, the women's finals, Sunday, the men's finals. Beautiful, beautiful red clay courts. It's going to be, it's being played over in Paris, so it's going to be 6 hours time difference. So you'll see it early in the morning. Encourage everybody to get up and watch it. Should be fun to see some of these rematches. Who knows? We may have in the men's final, at least, we may have a U.S. player battling for it all.
Yeah, we shall see. Actually, before we head out, Alan, I have some pricing stuff. I don't necessarily have the build up to these things, but I think X inflation, right? These are like these. I'm not making $19-14 into 2025, so it's just going off of what they were. But the original Wilson racket, called that wood one we were talking about, it was either ashwood or cedar handle, 75 cents in 1914. That's how it started. And you think it probably wasn't as popular. Maybe it was just essentially a piece of wood they were soaking and bending, but 75 cents. And then fast forward to the 70s, a Wilson Kramer wooden racket cost $20 to $25. So I'm sure they had some technological advances, but over the course of 60 years or 55 years, it went up from 75 cents to $20. And then others, around the same time in the 70s, they were $28. And then the top wood frames in the early 70s were about $30. So then they went from those $30 wood frames in the 70s to metal. And the price actually dropped for that Wilson T2000 that I said. It was about $15 to $20. The call is about the same price. They kind of matched the price.
Yep.
And then the top end head at the time, the aluminum was about $50. So who knows if steel was more expensive than aluminum, but it was double the price for the aluminum one. And the wood rackets around that time were about $40. Fast forward 10 more years, you get to the 80s. And I think this must be around, you said like Billie Jean King. Is that?
Yep.
Right.
That's right.
Like that type of era. In the 80s, whoever was stepping up around that time,
she was still dominant. Yep.
Yeah. So this is when the graphite and early composites started coming out, and this seems to be when sometimes it's it could be the materials that make things cost more money. Sometimes it's like the popularity and want of the new thing. because they came out with these graphite that at the time were $200, and then Wilson had one that was $325 at one point.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, and then have others like
bank.
high-end ones, folks that are into it. This Prince Boron was $300 to $500. Yeah, this Prince Sovereign models rumored, I don't know, maybe they were like the Chanel bags of the time, rumored to be thousands, like $1,000. And then you had like the good Wilsons that were like $300 to $400. And then it just like go towards the 90s and 2000s, the like decent Wilson classics, they were $160, and then the technology rackets would be close to like $300. So, and then any performance ones, I know you can get them at Walmart for $20 still, but if you go with the performance side, you're like $100 to $200. And that goes through today. It could be anywhere from $200 to $300 for a decent racket. Which if you're playing a lot, you probably buy. And if you're just going to play with your kids, it's probably still, $30 or less you could do. But that's just the difference.
That's right.
And technology plays into that. It's not only the materials, it's the technology around it.
Yeah, and if you want to go an old-fashioned wooden racket, you've only got one choice: eBay.
Oh yeah, probably.
Yeah, you're not gonna find them sold any place. Maybe a specialty online store, but I'm guessing eBay. Got to go old school.
Yeah, just two friends that want to play like the wooden racket game, right? That'll be the next pickleball. Right. Just go back to wooden rackets, like full size courts, right. Wooden rackets.
Yeah, with these tiny heads, everybody hit them off the side. So
yeah. Realize what they went through back in the day and how good they had to be.
Yeah, that's right. Good stuff. Well, I think a good episode, Tom. Thanks for digging into the sourcing and the pricing and the kind of component buildup of a racket for us. We'll all watch it a little bit differently this weekend. So on behalf of your humble hosts here at Rebuild Procurement Podcast, we are Tommy Finn, the guy who puts the fin in finance, and your OG in procurement, Alan Veek, hoping you will make this a powerful and productive week in procurement. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Show me, and you won't hear the word rebuild.